What's up, everybody? And welcome to episode 37 of the Sean Lowery Show. And I have a great guest today. He's drinking a beer and he's got a beautiful view behind him. And he's the host of the Bitcoin Rapid Fire podcast and a firm believer that Bitcoin is the future of money. So, K Vallis, what's going on, man?
Hey, Sean, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm very excited to have you on. You look like you have a beautiful setting behind you. Are you quarantined?
I actually am. We exercising a high degree of caution. I'm in Newfoundland right now. I was in Ontario a few weeks ago, and with all the craziness that's going on, we weren't officially required to quarantine until 3 days after we got back. That's when the policy changed.
Okay.
But we just decided, for an abundance of caution, we would, myself and the people I was with, we would self-isolate for 2 weeks and work from home and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's probably the right move. And I mean, hey, we can still have this conversation. We can still talk on the internet. You can still check your Bitcoin.
I'm being super productive, man. I got to tell you.
Like 20 years ago, even, imagine you might have just had like a DVD and the cable. It would have been terrible. So yeah. I'm feeling lucky that this is going to happen. It's at the time where the internet is just rapid. And I'm lucky my business is still operating right now because we have the post office and UPS. That's still going, but I just I feel fortunate, and the rest of it's all online. So,
gotta turn lemons into lemonade, man.
Exactly. All right, cool. But I'm excited to have you on, man, because you have a podcast, the Bitcoin Rapid Fire podcast, about Bitcoin. And I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with Bitcoin. I know about it, but I'm just so interested in it because it's obviously a very interesting topic.
I agree.
And so many people, they're just like, oh, what the hell is that? Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. I have no idea. There's different levels of understanding. But so let's assume the people listening, they know absolutely nothing about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency for now. And would you say, I would just ask, what is Bitcoin and why do you believe that it's the future of money?
Oh, man, that's such a hard question to answer. So, these kind of elevator pitch descriptions of Bitcoin are always difficult because,
right.
It's so multifaceted. There's a technological component, obviously. There's a monetary history component. There's an economic component. There's a game theory component. There's many different components. So it's difficult to answer that question not knowing kind of, where the person listening, where the receiver is at. But, maybe I'll just throw a curveball, and this is probably not what most people imagine it as. But Bitcoin is just a database, and it allows you to make changes. So in order to make changes to that database, you have to have some of those Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin can be divisible up to 8 decimal places. So the smallest unit of a Bitcoin is called a Satoshi. It's colloquially called a sat.
Okay.
So people may have heard the term stack sats, which just means accumulate these Satoshis.
And that's is that named after the founder?
It
Satoshi?
is.
Okay.
Yeah. So the founder, Satoshi Nakamoto, the pseudonymous creator of Bitcoin. And so there's 100 million Satoshis in every Bitcoin. And that's relevant today because a lot of people can't afford to buy one full Bitcoin. It's about $6,400 US as we speak. And so it's a database that if you hold some of these Satoshis, then beyond the small fee and able to send a transaction, you get to change that database, which is fundamentally just taking a number from here and moving it to there. And once you do that, you are no longer the owner of that ledger entry, those coins in that ledger entry. I know that sounds super basic and people will be like, well, why the fuck does that even, who cares about that? But, databases and particularly ledgers are fundamental to how society functions. It's fundamental to money. It's fundamental to trade. And interestingly, some of the first examples of writing we have, everyone's probably seen those little Sumerian tablets, from back in the day, which side note, when you see them in your history books at school, they look like newspaper sort of things that you hold up. They're literally like that small. They're like your 2 thumbs put together. They're tiny oftentimes. Irrelevant, but a fun little note. But so those things, the first iterations of those, the first examples we have of those were actually ledgers. Bob, gave me 2 cows. I gave him 10 pounds of rice or whatever. And so Bitcoin is a ledger that assigns values to different owners. Now, those owners are anonymous, right? Because the ledger is represented in, a string of letters and numbers. And so we've created the abstraction of coins, but that's really just in our minds. In practice, they're used in fractions of a coin in the units that I mentioned before, and it assigns values and organizes those values. So, and what it's done is it's introduced for the first time digital scarcity. So if you think of it like a photograph, you snap a cute photograph of your dog, you send it to your mom, she sends it to your aunt, and everyone's got a copy. The innovation here was for the first time to make something in the digital realm scarce. So once it's sent, it's not a copy of it is sent, the actual thing itself is sent, and it can't be held by both parties. It can't be replicated or anything like that. There's a lot, there's not complicated math. Well, there's some degree of complicated mathematics that allow that to be possible. And the breakthrough with Bitcoin, there was innovation, but what the genius of the creator was that they took a variety of different innovations from cryptography, from mathematics, from computer science, and combined them in a very ingenious way, sprinkled on a couple other elements, and Bitcoin was born. So
yeah,
I know that's probably a bad explanation, but fundamentally it's a protocol layer that layers on top of the internet protocol layers that allows for that unique transfer of data that has never been possible before because of the way it transfers that data. It does it uniquely. It doesn't copy it.
And that scarcity means that then there can be like value assigned, right? Like kind of like, so
absolutely.
So value, that is like, so you said that it sounded simple, but honestly, if someone never heard about it before, like it doesn't sound simple,
Oh, that was a bad explanation.
No.
I'll admit.
For a noob, yes, maybe. But but it's just a way to exchange money. Or, I mean, I don't know if money's the right word, but it's a way to exchange value without a centralized government behind it, or a centralized agency, or some. That's the base, right?
That's totally right. So let me, instead of the curveball answer, the normal answer.
I love the curveball answer.
The normal answer is it's a decentralized protocol that, as you said, allows for the transfer of these units. Now, we are the ones that ascribe value to these units, so
right.
we'll leave that
just like anything, though.
Just like anything, yeah. So it's a global decentralized system that allows for the transfer of these units without an intermediary. It's censorship resistant. It's open source, and so that allows it to be accessed by anybody and not controlled by anybody. Now, we'll get into a couple of different variables that allow for that, because there's some pretty common questions there. But fundamentally, it eliminates the middleman. And the way it does that is that Bitcoin is operated by a network of nodes. So these are just mini computers, and they do two things. One, they hold the entire transaction history of the Bitcoin ledger. From the moment the Bitcoin network started up until now, every single transaction between every single address on the network is recorded in every single node.
And that's the blockchain, right?
That's a part of it.
Okay.
That's a part of it. So this is the transaction ledger.
Ledger. Okay.
The other thing that those little mini computers that are called nodes do is they maintain, or they adhere. They make sure that the transactions are adhering to a set of rules. These are called the consensus rules. So, for example, if you have a Bitcoin node and a transaction comes across your network and it doesn't adhere to, let's say, the Bitcoin rules. So one of the rules of Bitcoin is that there will never be more than 21 million. And the supply of Bitcoin is on a consistent schedule. And again, we can get into that further in a second. But so that's one of Bitcoin's rules. If something comes across your network node and it doesn't adhere to those rules, it's rejected by the node. And so the way this global decentralized network works is, one, the transaction history is stored everywhere, so it can't be shut down. And two, it's self-reinforcing, in that every node is reinforcing the rules of the network, so it makes sure that the bad actors can't influence the network.
Okay. Yeah. And it's kind of just like gold, but through the internet, which is like it kind of right. Like it's a currency that everyone across the world can use, but we've had stuff like that before. But
Mm-hmm.
it's on the internet and it's not backed by a government. Is that kind of like
Right. That's totally right. And digital gold has been like a label that Bitcoin has received by many, because when we go down the rabbit hole of money, or let's just stick with gold, right? A lot of people just de facto think gold is valuable. You grow up and your parents have some gold jewelry or watches, and you see the bad guy in a James Bond movie with a ton of gold, and we just know that gold is valuable.
right?
But the reason why it's valuable is just like everything, the properties that it has and the way we value those properties. That's it. There's nothing inherently magical or valuable about gold. With gold in particular, we noticed as society complexified that the barter system, whereby if you have oranges and I have apples, became unworkable, because
Right.
sometimes I won't want apples or
Right.
sometimes you won't want oranges.
Right.
And the credit system was too hard to maintain,
Right.
to keep track of.
Right.
So we needed something to facilitate exchange between people. And so, many things were used: salt, glass beads, large stones, rope, seashells, all this kind of stuff. But all of these options had drawbacks, right? And so gold was the one that had the best attributes for the purpose that we had in our minds for it. And that was to facilitate this. So one very simple example is, one of gold's properties is that it's very scarce, right? And the reason why that's valuable as a money is because if we start using a money that's not very scarce, well, then we're going to, value our time in this form of money. And I'm going to trade you 2 seashells for an entire house. But then someone comes up and says, oh, I found 100 seashells over
Exactly.
there, 1,000 seashells over there. And then everything gets disrupted.
Exactly. Yeah.
So gold scarcity was one of the things that allowed it to be useful as money. It was also divisible. It was also very durable. If you're
Right.
being paid in salt,
Right.
and the word salary comes from salt,
I didn't
then
know that.
if it gets rained on or something,
Right.
then it's gone,
Yeah.
right? So it's not very durable.
Right.
So when societies choose monies, they're just looking at a set of properties that allow it to facilitate exchange and allow us to store value across space and time. So
Exactly.
across space is for trade and exchange, and across time is, I work 20 hours today, but I only need to work 10 hours a day to subsist, to survive. And so I want to store that extra 10 for use down the road, to start a
Right.
business, build a house,
Right.
security, whatever.
Right.
But gold also had several attributes that, well, my premise is that the money we use goes a long way to determining the structures that emerge in society. One such example is, okay, gold was the best form of money that we could find in the past history. But if you had a lot of it, well, then all of a sudden the question comes in your mind: how do I protect it? Right? I don't want to keep it at my house because, someone who's stronger than me could just come and jack me and take it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, maybe if we agree on this strong group of people over here, they're going to protect everybody's gold in the community or in the kingdom or in the civilization.
It's a bank, right?
It's a bank.
Yeah.
It's a king. It's a political structure.
Right,
it's something that has enough power to resist other forms of power that would seek to take that value from us.
Right. Laws. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that works to some degree, but it also creates a power structure that can be used for malicious purposes. Right. And there's obviously many examples throughout history where, there's benevolent kings, and then a shitty king comes to power and he, jacks everybody and starts wars and does all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yep.
Another drawback of something like gold is that it can be debased. And this is actually where we get that concept from, is that I believe it was in Roman times, but the emperors that weren't benevolent kings, they decided to collect everybody's gold coins and remint them, because we're going to put the new king's face on it. And you don't want to be unpatriotic and not have your new king's face on your coins, do you?
Interesting.
And so, right, and they would mix in another metal, right? Then maybe they mix in a little bit of silver, or maybe they shave a little bit off the edge. And so it had the best properties that we could find for money, but it also had drawbacks. And so in the context of today, what people are so excited about Bitcoin, or one of the reasons, is because many people feel that it as a form of money, its properties are better than that of the previous form of money, which was gold. Now we can talk about paper currencies and that whole mess that we're currently really witnessing the scale of.
Yeah.
But just as an example to finish off that train of thought
Yeah.
is gold. Like I said, gold could be seized. If I work my whole life and I got a pile of gold in my house, or if I have it with the king, both of them can be easily
Right.
taken from me. Someone comes up, puts a gun to my head or a knife to my throat and says, I want it. And I say, okay.
Yep.
Or they could just kill me and take it. They
Right.
don't need my cooperation.
Right.
With something like Bitcoin, that can't happen.
Can't
Someone could
happen.
definitely, someone could coerce me, and I might value my life more than my Bitcoin and say, okay, I'll tell you how to access it. I'll give you, I'll give you my private keys. But if they kill me, they can't access it. And that's a fundamentally different dynamic. And I think it will cause different structures to emerge in society, or perhaps more accurately, it will cause structures that currently exist to dissolve because they are no longer necessary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's actually cool. I never thought of it that way about someone. They can't kill you and take it because, yeah, they need your information and everything. Uh, all right. So yeah, that's a very good explanation, and that makes sense. That makes sense. So on a baseline, gold, and then the current Bitcoin better than gold, but then there's like governments. And all right. So here's my experience with Bitcoin. I have always been interested in it, and in 2015, 2016, May 2016, I bought two for 450 each. Only on just it seemed trendy, and I felt
Yep.
like I was
Yep.
ahead of the game. I
Yep.
honestly, truly looked at it like a stock or an investment. That's how I looked
Sure.
at it.
Sure.
And I sold them in November of 2017 for like around
Good job.
8,000 each, and
Yeah.
I made $20,000. And actually, right after I sold them. Honestly, I would like to say that I read the market or something like that, but honestly, like my business was going through a little bit of a struggle, and I needed the cash, so I sold it. And right after I sold it, it went up to 19,000, and then it went back down to like 3,000 around 2019. And I was like, all right, I'm happy I made the money. Like, but the whole time, I I heard stuff like this, like people like you talk about it, and I love the idea of it. I just love the idea of anything that's digital or new age, and it made perfect sense why it's value. But I admit I always looked at it as an investment, and I made the money in it. And recently, like I actually just put like 5,000 in the stock market, and I considered putting it into Bitcoin, but I don't know. I'm not as sold on it as I was a few years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons is just the I don't know. The government, they back money. They collect tax dollars. It's backed by the army. It has like I mean, obviously, like I have an e-commerce website, and there's a thing where you can have people buy in Bitcoin. Like if I did that, it's kind of irresponsible because it's not a currency that is steady or it's ever changing. Unlike a dollar backed by a government, and just I don't know. With all that, I don't know. I'm not as sold on it. And like, what is the like argument against that? Is the goal for someone who is a Bitcoin enthusiast that eventually it will be used to exchange goods, to buy a coffee, to buy a house, to buy anything, like just used as currency? Because then it'll probably steady out and be worth the same kind of. And I don't know. Is it ever going to be like that? Do you think?
I know what you mean. The volatility
Yeah.
scares a lot of people off, not even from an investment perspective, but a lot of investors are familiar with volatility. But
Right.
certainly in commerce, you're right. I mean, because if you price something at $100 and you accept it $100 equal value in Bitcoin, and it tanks 20% the next day, then you lose,
Yeah.
right? So what I would say is, one, fundamentally, this is a paradigm shift, and it is, the I don't want to say goals because that's for each individual person to decide, but the game that is afoot, I would say, is the separation of money and state. And the reason for that is because the ability to create money is far too great a power for any one entity, organization, person to have. And history is littered with examples where that power is abused. And it's my contention, and the many people in this space, that we are living through a time where it's being egregiously abused the power to create money. I mean,
How so?
well, I mean, the central bankers of the world can create money however much they want. Their only thing they have to consider is that the relative value of paper currency to what other central banks are doing. You know, the stimulus package that's currently being devised in the States looks like it's going to be about $6 trillion. Where do you think? And the Federal Reserve has said that 4 trillion of that is going to come from them. So the Federal Reserve buys treasury bonds from the U.S. government.
Okay.
Where does the Fed get the money? They just it's a
the taxpayers. The taxpayers?
No. The Fed doesn't collect taxes. The Fed opens up their computer. I'm simplifying, of course. They open up their computer and they say 4 0 0 0 0 0 0 0 0. How many zeros are in a trillion? And then they press enter, and then that money exists.
And then and inflation is something to do with that, right? Like,
in Austrian economics, people would describe inflation not as an increase in prices, but an increase in the money supply.
Okay.
And so, again, simple example: if I have 5 apples and you have if I have 5 apples and you have $5, and that's the whole economy, then each apple is $1, right? That's because the only thing to buy is apples, and the only money is $5.
Right.
If I give you $50, if I create 45 more dollars, then every apple is $10, right?
Right.
And so the more money that we create, the less value each existing unit of currency has. And so back to the gold example for a moment. The gold standard was used intermittently throughout history because it was a check on the
value.
Well, it was a check on the abuse of power by anyone who controlled it.
Okay.
And so the other element of it is gold requires a great deal of energy and resources to get. You have to prospect, you have to buy equipment, you have to drill into rock, you have to refine. And so it has real economic cost to produce. And that's significant because the cost to produce it with a real economic cost is actual economic activity. You have to buy those machines from somebody.
It's cheaper to just make money. Yeah.
Right. And so in 1971,
it was Nixon, I think, right, in America.
It was Nixon. Yeah. So up till 1971, the entire world was under something called the Bretton Woods Agreement, and what this meant was that the dollar was going to be the reserve currency for the world, and that the U.S. would hold the world's gold reserves, and that the dollar would be convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. And so this was a check on, governments printing more money than they had. And things worked really well during that period. And then in 1971, Nixon said, we're going to temporarily suspend that. The reason was because they spent too much money in Vietnam, and they were spending more than they actually had gold in the vaults. And so we're just going to temporarily suspend that while we get our house back in order. And that never happened. And so since that time, the entire world has been on a fiat money system, which basically just means as much money as anyone wants can be printed. And the only thing that you need to consider is how much your competitors are printing. So, if France is printing a certain amount and the US is printing far less, well, then France's currency is going to devalue substantially, and that's going to cause economic turmoil for them.
Exchange rates, right? That's like where that comes from then.
Exactly.
So the power though, the governments that have the power, because if they create all this money, then they're the ones in power. And the idea of cryptocurrency or Bitcoin is to take away that power from them. I'm trying to understand exactly how it takes the power away from them, because don't they have to you can't just, if you print a bunch of money, there's economics and how does that
let me answer the second part of your original question.
Okay.
Because you said, can I accept this for money, for, things that I sell and that kind of stuff. And just to sum it up quickly, I would say that first of all, in my opinion, this is a paradigm shifting moment, just as it was when the more primitive civilizations, let's say 2,000-3,000 years ago, first started using gold as either a store of value and then later coinage and currency. That was probably a very big shift from whatever system was existing before. I think the same shift is underway right now. So we are currently in the monetization phase of this transition. So naturally, when the market cap is so small, the market cap of Bitcoin is about $110 billion right now. And in the context of a global economy that's in the let's say $80 trillion range,
Okay.
and the debt in the 250,
Okay.
300 plus trillion range. Gold has an $8 trillion market cap. Money supply around the world is in the tens of trillions. It's a drop in the bucket. So as it's monetizing, as it's ascending to that status of being an actual transactable currency,
Okay.
naturally there's going to be great volatility, because
Okay.
a lot of that money from the legacy systems, from all those different asset classes I just mentioned, is coming into it and going out of it, because it's a constantly in flux market. And that means dramatic swings because it's still so small. But when Bitcoin first started in 2009, it had zero price,
Right.
nothing.
Right.
And then it was worth a couple pennies, and then it was
Right.
worth a couple dollars, and then 10, and then 100, and then 1,000. And I think in the next 10 years we'll see Bitcoin in the 100,000 to $1 million to $10 million range, because it needs to have that level of economic mass
Per Bitcoin.
Yes. And
Dang.
so
Better
when
buy
it
some.
gets when it gets to that size, so when Bitcoin has a size of, let's say, $10 trillion market cap, well, then you'll see less volatility, because it would take a lot more money to move it around. So the size of Bitcoin relative to the legacy systems, the existing financial systems and currency markets and asset markets around the world, is growing, right? The difference is shrinking. So Bitcoin is becoming larger. So volatility is still definitely a part of it. And that's why it's not used that much in commerce right now.
Yeah.
But people are using it as a store of wealth.
So as the price rises, it's getting closer to like evening out and being more like used for a transaction. And aren't governments going to try to stop that?
Totally, definitely. Already have in many cases.
So I kind of like. I mean, I don't hate the government. Like I'm fine with it. Like I'm happy to be American, but like I'm also down to like do something for the people, and like so I'm trying to get my like big picture alignment with Bitcoin as something I've had a relationship with, and like so that is kind of if I invest in it and more people invest in it and I'm an advocate for it, and over time like it does get up to those levels, then the power is all in the people's hands. And what would like the world look like then if there are no governments backing currencies? Like how will things look different? Like will the government collect taxes on it?
That will be a challenge. Government will shrink substantially. I don't know what type of governance there will be in a Bitcoin world, because to the illusion I made
you still need
before,
police. You still need police and stuff.
Yeah, you'll need some form of these sorts of things, but so I don't know what it will manifest. Like I said, all I know is that the middlemen and the institutions that were previously a manifestation of the types of monies that a society used will change, and they'll likely shrink, because at this stage we have massive institutions, to whether it's banking institutions or government institutions, as a result of the type of money that we use. To your other question, aren't governments going to kick up a stink? Who's going to be willing to relinquish that level of power? Nobody with any rational sense would ever do that. You're right, but that's the beauty of the way Bitcoin is designed. There were examples in the 90s of people trying to create a similar type of digital cash or e-gold, and because they were centralized, they were shut down very early on. The feds came knocking and said, hey, you're trying to make a competing money? Get the hell out of here, right? But Bitcoin cannot be shut down. It can be slowed down. You can slow down the on and off ramps. But at this stage, there's tens of millions of holders around the world. And because of the distributed nature of the network, the copy of the ledger and the rules of the network are literally on tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of computers all over the world. So it can't be tracked or traced. Well, sorry, let me take that back, because there are ways of tracking and tracing it, but it can't be stopped. You can cut yourself off from Bitcoin, but you can't shut down Bitcoin.
Okay. So governments are going to try to stop it. We don't know exactly what the world will look like if there's no governments. But then it's interesting though. But then also banks, right? Banks probably fucking hate Bitcoin, right? Because that kind of takes away their, right?
Destroys their business model.
Destroys their business model. So, right. So one of the good things about banks though is that, I don't know, they give loans to businesses and stuff like that. Like if there's no banks, how would that, like, so no banks, no governments, like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm down for that.
See, there will be, well, look, if I have money, I have excess capital, and you want to start a business, I could loan you the money.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't fundamentally change the nature of credit. It just decentralizes it. And I would say makes it more accessible. because right now a bank won't, the microloan industry is somewhat interesting of an example here, because for a long time banks wouldn't touch them, and there has to be specialized institutions for microloans of in developing economies and stuff like that. But see, the relationship of money to credit doesn't fundamentally change. It just eliminates the middleman. If you come to me with a good idea and you say, hey, I want to start a business, I'll say, well, I got a bunch of free capital, and I'll loan it out to you at a rate that I decide. It's a far more free market-based rate for determining what borrowing should cost.
Okay, so getting rid of banks doesn't get rid of loans for small businesses, which help economy, which give people jobs and stuff. Okay,
not at all.
Cool.
Not at all.
And then go ahead.
I would just say, I would argue that the manipulation of the money supply and the way the banks control capital is actually ultimately destructive to an economy. I think if price signals are something that are very misunderstood, but if you look at the US dollar, since around 1913, the inception of the Federal Reserve, it's lost about 96, 97% of its value. And I presume in the few coming years, where there's massive bailout packages and universal basic income, helicopter money for people as a result of the current crisis we're going through, I would say that debasement will accelerate. And so that makes it far more difficult to make economic calculation if you're a business person, if you can't accurately know what the value of your capital is going to be in 1 year, 5 year, 10 years. But in something like Bitcoin, the monetary policy, so monetary policy is what the Federal Reserve does, right? They manipulate interest rates, and then they decide how much capital is going to be in the system. Bitcoin's monetary policy is known. Every 10 minutes, a certain amount of Bitcoin are mined, right? And so at the first 4 years of Bitcoin, that was 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. The next 4 years was 25 every 10 minutes. The next 4 years, which is what we're in now, is 12 and a half every 10 minutes. And in May of this year, it's called the halving. We're going to go into the next 4 year period, and it'll be 6.25 Bitcoin every 10 minutes, up until the year 2140, at which point, so that process will continue to half and half and half. 21 million, or just under 21 million, will be issued in the year 2140. There will not be any more Bitcoin created. And so this is, if people have invested or looked at gold before, one of the defining characteristics of gold is something called the stock to flow ratio. And this is one of the important metrics when you're determining, especially a form of money. And basically the stock is all the above ground supply, jewelry and bullion and vaults and all that kind of stuff. The flow is the annual new production, right? So how much does the annual new production inflate the existing stock? And so for gold, it's about 2%. Every year, about 2%, the supply grows by about 2%. And so Bitcoin stock to flow come May will be basically the same as gold's. And then the next 4 years, it'll be cut in half. And the next 4 years will be cut in half. And so
that was the design from the beginning, right? That's one of the reasons why it's smart.
Absolutely. And you were referencing what the influence of scarcity on value at the beginning of this conversation. Bitcoin is becoming more and more scarce every 4 years. And that's probably going to put, as long as people still find it useful, that's the caveat. But as long as they do, then that halving of scarcity, or that increase of scarcity every 4 years, is probably going to put a lot of upward pressure on its price.
So for Bitcoin enthusiasts, the goal is by 2040, we're all buying coffee, and like, this might be a dumb question, but like, what would that look like? A card? Or like, let's say we're buying coffee.
Man, 2040 is a long time away.
Like just a scan of a scan of your eyes or whatever.
I mean, dude, I lived in China for about 10 years, right? So
dang, okay.
Like you can pay for things with your face now in many places.
I heard about that. That's true.
Yeah, you don't even need to use your phone. You pick up your groceries, you stare into the thing, you're gone. So by, at that time, I don't know what's going to be around. But
it doesn't really matter, right? Because it can be a card, it could be anything, but it doesn't matter as long as it's the Bitcoin is the value of it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So what are the threats of like other cryptocurrencies? Is that a threat to Bitcoin, or is it a help it? Because there's a lot of them, right?
There's a lot.
Like Ethereum, I put a few bucks into that around that time too. I'm out completely out of the game now, but Litecoin. So are they all like? Would it be better in general if just everyone agreed to one? And like, what are the deal with it? What's the deal
I
with the
mean,
other ones?
maybe it would in theory, but that's not how free markets work, right? So there's, at this point, there's literally thousands. I don't know if it's at 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever, because once Bitcoin came on the scene, the genie was out of the bottle. The way of putting these technologies together was realized, and people thought, oh my God, this is incredible. And then there was a lot of scams, there was a lot of copycats and that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. My contention is, I think it's relatively zero sum if we're talking about, money. I just think Bitcoin, the head start that it has, the network effects that it has, the development community, the approach to it.
Yeah. It's
I
obviously
don't.
the big daddy of
Yeah,
cryptocurrency.
I don't think, and everyone wants to do blockchain for this, blockchain for that. I'm going to put my fucking candles on the blockchain and it's all
Yeah.
good. But I think we have to be, I think this is a very, very high stakes game. And I think people realize that. And Bitcoin, compared to something like Ethereum, is very conservative in how it approaches development of the technology. And so I think that's out of a recognition that we kind of probably only have one kick at the can at this thing. And
Yeah.
and also, I tend to not be too greedy. Like, maybe Ethereum's going to do all this fun stuff with smart contracts, but I think we solve the problem that is money first, and then we work with the technology to layer on other solutions. A prime example of this is in 2017, in the big run up, it became, very expensive to make a Bitcoin transaction, 20, 30, 40,
Yeah.
$50.
Yeah.
And so now what we have, and it's been under development, for a while, it's something called the Lightning Network. It's a protocol that goes on top of the Bitcoin protocol. And it, for lack of a more simple explanation, it makes extremely cheap, extremely fast transactions. I won't get into the technical ways in which it does that, but it allows you to use Bitcoin for those coffee purchases, or even smaller. I mean, you could spend a penny, and it's lightning fast. You don't have to wait for confirmation times. So this is the type of development that's going on. But Bitcoin is the base layer, and you want to be really conservative with that, because it's very important that it doesn't get messed up. But I will say the last thing about that is, if it does get stopped, if quantum computing cracks the cryptography, or if something comes in and stops it, from a technological sense, not a political or government,
Okay.
then, like I said, every node on the network has a complete history of all the transactions on the network with all the addresses ever used. So if we needed to reboot this system, with some modifications,
It could be
then
done.
it could be done without any interruption, because all the people, like, how much you have, how much I have, how much she has, would be just taken from that ledger history and put on the new one for the distribution. So I think one of the things about Bitcoin that's unique is that it was born at a time when people weren't watching. So the distribution was much more, less manipulated, let's say. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, people that got in early are filthy rich now,
Right,
and they have a lot. They'll have a lot of influence, but diminishing over time. But now if anyone launches an ICO, then half of the coins go to the starting team, and half, people jump on it to try to make a quick buck. And I just think that, for me, it's Bitcoin only. I've yet to see another use case that makes a strong argument for anything
I feel
else.
like for the overall case, it's better if everyone just kind of agrees with that. But and all right, so I think this is on topic, but this really fucking confused me when I got Bitcoin Cash, right? So I had put my money in there. I cashed out like 16,000 or something around there, and then all of a sudden in my account on Coinbase with the app, I had Bitcoin Cash. And it was just like, sweet, more money. I didn't really get that. But that's basically, to people listening, like, I bought Bitcoin, I sold Bitcoin, I had $0 left, and then all of a sudden, this Bitcoin Cash popped up in my account, and I actually needed the money at the time still, so I cashed that out. But like, does that have something to do with it? I feel like that was like what was that? What the hell was that?
Well, so that was born out of a certain faction, very small, in the community at the time, and some early investors in Bitcoin that said, we want to go by a different roadmap.
That's
We
right.
want to pursue development in a different way. And in particular, and this might not make too much sense to your audience, but they wanted to increase the block space, which basically just enabled more transactions to be, done in a similar amount of time, and that brought down the cost of transactions, what I was referring to earlier.
So like a few developers were like, I got a better way to do this.
Right, exactly. Okay. And a few developers, investors, community people, whatever. And so they broke off from the chain. So basically, if you imagine the Bitcoin blockchain going like this, then they changed the rules, the consensus rules I was mentioning earlier. And so then they created a new chain. And then everyone who held Bitcoin got an airdrop of these new coins. And then once they came into existence, then the market determined how much they should be worth. And, it had a brief pump, I think in November, December of 17, when they first came on the scene. And, they've been on a downward trend ever since.
I haven't heard anything about that since
development community is almost non-existent. It's, the market is the market, and it decides what should live and what should die. And the market's just decided that the whole Bitcoin Cash experiment and many of the other so-called altcoins that have emerged since that time are bullshit, are either scams or, people being greedy, people being rushing this thing too much, not appreciating what's at stake, and
that definitely gives credibility to Bitcoin. It seems like, because all these other coins and all these other trying different things, forking it off, like Bitcoin's still the number one. So yeah. All right, so I'm convinced a little more. Like like a world without governments is interesting. Like, I don't know, maybe that could be good, maybe that could be bad, but yeah.
I can't say if we won't have governments, right? I think we may still agree that some form of organizing body is helpful, but wrapped up in all this is a dramatic reframing and changing of how people view their own personal sovereignty and responsibility in society. In society today, in many ways, we delegate responsibility to so many different places. We delegate responsibility for our health, for our finances, for our security, for everything. And this is as they say, personal responsibility is the new counterculture. And this is going to require reframing of that. But if people were to do that, take control of their finances and all those other things for that matter that I mentioned, then we will have a vastly different set of requirements for organizing how we interact with each other. Fundamentally, that's what this is all about. Money is the fundamental mechanism for organizing human economic interaction.
Right.
And so if you upgrade the money, you're going to upgrade that interaction.
And upgrade everyone's personal responsibility, upgrading their happiness, upgrading the quality of life.
Exactly. And the more trade and exchange that we can facilitate, and the less trust required to do that, the more, I think, the more abundant world, the more peaceful world, the more cooperative world we're going to have de facto. And we won't need as much structure in place to, guide us to that. And so I think, again, you upgrade the money, you upgrade the civilization. That's been the case throughout time. And I think we're on the precipice of dramatically upgrading the money, and there will be a tumult. The transition will obviously be painful for some, messy for some, as it always is. But I think on the back of this, we come out with a tool with which to construct a civilization, the likes of which we probably currently think is unimaginable. Wow. And I know that sounds very hyperbolic.
No, dude, no, it's awesome. That's actually that's pretty convincing. Like, I'm gonna get back on board, dude. I love that. I want to be a part of a change for humanity for the better, obviously. Yeah. So that's really cool. So I was gonna ask you about blockchain. I kind of heard you like poo-poo it a little bit, like, oh, everyone's trying to, like, is that just like a buzzword? Because like I've heard a lot of like, I don't know everything. I listen to certain people, and you hear like, well, blockchain is actually can be used in business for all these certain ways.
Yeah.
And like there was like this blockchain conference that was coming into my area, and like I was considering going. I didn't go. Actually, it was now, so it wouldn't be going on now. But like so then I like sit down and I'm like, all right, I'm a smart guy, like, I'm not a genius, but I can, if I sit around and think about something, I still don't really understand blockchain, like, or its applications in business or anything. And I heard you kind of like poo-poo it, and it just
Yeah,
is.
well, I'm with you, man. I don't understand it either.
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
see I don't see a use case for it. Um, if one
That's
emerges,
that's like that's what I'm kind of looking for. Like, and I've been looking. I'm asking you, and I've been looking on the internet and stuff. A use case. Like, give me a
yeah,
specific example of, okay, you run this type of business and you implement some type of blockchain, and that can help in this type of way. I've been looking for that, and I just can't
yeah.
find it, man.
I don't see what value it brings over and above like a corporate database or an intranet type of thing. I
Right.
mean, the whole, and I just think it's been a money grab. It remains to be seen if it can be. And I know all the big companies are using it as a buzzword and all this kind
Buzzword.
of stuff, but I really think that it's Bitcoin, not blockchain, and that all the things that you're hoping to do with blockchain, or many of them, will probably eventually be able to be done on one of the layered solutions that gets built on top of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin
Mm.
as a bedrock, um, I wouldn't spend much time pursuing other things because it's so solid, and what it does, and what it's what it's attempting to do and what it's emerging as is so fundamentally important and so fundamentally valuable that we can hold off a bit on imagining all the weird, wacky, wonderful things it might be able to do in the future, which I do think it will. I mean, at the end of the day, it's programmable money. So, right now we're just making sure that the base layer is ironclad and that it can't be, corrupted, manipulated, shut down, censored, all this kind of stuff. But end of the day, it's programmable money. So, like I said, the dramatic upgrade from something like gold, which is just a shiny rock, albeit with some great properties and was very useful, but the upgrade to a digital form of gold, so with properties that has the properties of gold, plus you're able to conjure up properties for it and then implement them into it, is so exciting that I wouldn't be looking elsewhere to try to do it too quickly, because you want to make sure you do this in a way that's not going to sacrifice any of the things on that foundation. And so, the exciting stuff is coming.
I don't really follow that. You can do things on top of it. Like, you have like an example?
Yeah. So what I mentioned, Bitcoin is a protocol on top of the internet
Right.
protocol, right?
Yeah.
And then the Lightning Network is a protocol being developed on top of Bitcoin.
And that is
So
to
that's
be able to
basically
exchange it faster.
right. So it's basically, it's tethered to the Bitcoin blockchain, and it settles, in certain ways and at certain times, but it allows for certain functionality. In the case of the Lightning Network, initially it's for fast, cheap transactions. Now think about that for a second. What other things might fast, cheap transactions be useful for? What if your salary was streamed instead of every 2 weeks? What if for every second you work, you actually made money?
That'd
And
be
if you
cool.
walked off the job site, your pay stopped, or if you worked an extra 3 hours, your pay kept flowing,
That'd be sweet.
right?
That
If there
might that
wasn't
might
a
that might hurt some people who have like saving issues, but that's their issue.
right, but if
No,
there
that'd be
wasn't,
awesome. That's cool.
if the cost of transaction was so slow or so low, and the speed of transaction was so fast, there was no friction in that dynamic, then it opens up a world of possibilities for
Mm.
streaming money, let's say. And that's just one application, but it's all related to the fundamental security of the base layer that is the Bitcoin network. So we
Okay.
can't we want to be very conservative on the base layer, and then we can play
Okay.
around a little bit more with the Lightning Network, because if we make a mistake there, it's not as severe, right? If
Okay.
the Lightning Network now is still a bit in development, it's still a bit risky, mistakes happen. But the Bitcoin layer to which it's tethered, it is ironclad,
Rock solid. Okay.
rock solid. And so again, in the future, there will be a layer on top of Lightning, or there'll be another layer on top of Bitcoin, and a layer on top of that, and a layer on top of that, and all these layers will tether back to the base layer as that ironclad, tether to trust and security. But it will allow for all these different functions that we can't even think of right now.
Yeah,
And
I'm trying to think of like I can't think like I'm trying to think of something like loans, or I don't know. I guess you said
dude,
you can't think of them right
everything.
now.
I mean,
Everything.
everything you
Dang.
could think of to
I
do
mean,
with
everything is connected to money. Like, dang, that's
yeah,
crazy.
man.
That's
Money is
crazy.
the other half of every transaction, and like I said,
Yeah.
it's that lubricant for facilitating exchange between people. And the reason why we have this world we have today with all this fancy technology and all these comforts is because of specialization and trade. And anything that gets in the way of that slows that process down and limits our prosperity. And anything that gets out of the way of that and amplifies that process makes us more prosperous, makes things more abundant, makes things more cooperative. And that's why, that's
Yeah,
why people are so excited about
that's
Bitcoin.
pretty cool. All right, that's like, as someone who was kind of sold and then going back and forth, like I actually feel genuinely more excited about it now than I did before.
Well, good, good.
Here's another random thing that kind of got me like off of it a little bit. On Instagram, I keep getting all these DMs from random people who are like forex
Oh
Bitcoin.
man,
What the hell is that? It's because it obviously seems very scammy to me, and they use the
dude.
word Bitcoin, and I'm like, this is a scam, but like, what is it? And like, what is that?
Fuck
Forex.
all those people. I mean,
Yeah.
forex is foreign exchange,
Okay. Okay.
like currency exchange, and that's like one of the oldest scams in the book. It's massive. But look, nobody who's seriously into Bitcoin is ever going to hit you up on Instagram
That's what
telling
I
you they got
figured. Yeah.
like a great way to make some quick money. That
Exactly.
this community is like, they're very serious about this thing,
Right.
and
And
they're like
those people are just kind of using it in a scammy way, aren't they? They're
of
just
course, yeah.
yeah.
They see
And
they see a
it was so
quick buck
obvious
and a
to me.
buzzword.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
buzzword and a quick buck. Okay.
So
So
I
yeah,
see
and
them
I
all
feel
the
like
time, and I
you
delete
see
them
them. You
immediately.
see them all the time because I see them
Yeah.
all the time too. And yeah, I do the same thing. But yeah, just like they kind of, as I was like sold already, like sold, didn't have any considering my thoughts on it. Then I got that. I knew
Look,
that it
dude,
was scammy, but I was just like,
I'll
what the
grant
hell?
you, there's a like, it's a very unassuming revolution, because you think a revolution is going to be this big obvious thing, right? And many of us that are probably listening to this weren't around in the early days of the internet, just to like
I
in the
wasn't.
early
Yeah.
90s or whatever. But
Yeah.
it was pretty under the radar at that time too, and the people that
That's
were involved in
crazy.
it were like geeks and weirdos, and they had all these funny memes and all this kind of stuff. And that's very
That's
much what
crazy.
this is like right now. And so you could be forgiven for like dipping your toes in the water and being like, what the
Right.
hell is all this? Is so
Yeah.
cringy, all
I'm
this
obviously
weird.
interested.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. But all this, like, people come in like, what is all this weird lingo? And what's this meme about
Right.
stacking stats? And what's this honey
Yeah.
badger don't care? What does that mean? Like, this can't be serious shit. There's no way this could be serious.
Yeah.
But it's just, I mean, I
True.
don't know. I don't
That's
know
a
why
good
things
analogy.
go down
That's a
like
good
this, but
that's a good analogy because like I remember a little bit because like I just AOL, but it was the internet was, and I've just learned from learning that a lot of people about the internet were like it's a fad. It's
tons
gonna
of
be the
people.
internet
Paul
is
Krugman, a Nobel laureate economist, said in 90 like 7 or 8 that in 2005 you'll be back to using your fax machine, and the internet will be of nothing more than having been a fad or something like that. I mean, people have a hard time seeing outside the status quo,
yeah
and
yeah
this is, I strongly believe this is another one of those examples. And again, I can kind of get it if you're only, you got to stick with it a bit and dig down
that's
the
what I'm
rabbit
kind of
hole
doing.
a bit.
That's what I'm kind of
Yeah.
doing. I'm like
Yeah.
going through
Because
phases
you
of
could
it.
easily be turned off by scams and weirdness and cringiness. And, some people are so excited about it that they get ahead of themselves when they articulate it, and they kind of come off as a bit
But
crazy,
but then my other problem is that if I'm only looking at it as an investment, like I might as well just buy Amazon or like something else. And to me, that's essentially what it was. Like it's just I'm putting this much money in, I'm looking to get a return.
Right.
But when you explain it in those cooler ways about changing a society for the better, like that's kind of what I fell in love with at the very beginning, and I
Yeah.
kind of like forgot about that a little bit. So it's cool to be reminded.
That's the game,
Uh,
man. I mean, look, nobody in the space is going to mind getting wealthy off this thing, obviously, right? Because that will just open up a lot of different opportunities to be able to pursue things that you're interested in and contribute in the way that you want to contribute. But that's not what this is about. All that ICO bullshit and stuff, that's just about making a quick buck. And if you did it, well, then whatever. It's not,
yeah.
it's not my
So
thing. But this is about a fundamentally different way of interacting as human beings on Earth, and an upgraded way. And it doesn't seem like that when you first encounter it, but that's what this is about. And I can tell you from speaking with tons of people in the space, almost everybody feels that way. They're very, committed to that cause. But this is the beauty of the network itself, and the innovation is that it incentivizes contribution to it, but it
right.
hijacks your greed to do so. So
Yeah.
you want
Yeah.
this.
That helps. Like that.
Yeah, of
Like,
course, you
yeah.
want this thing to be what it can, to ascend to that upgraded form of money that I've been articulating. But
Right.
if and a lot of people contribute to this thing like I do with, for little to no.
How much do you have invested?
Well, I'm not gonna say that, but and
Like a super lot, like a good amount, like a healthy amount.
unfortunately, as we often say in the space, I ended up losing all of mine in an unfortunate boating accident. So, but had I
A boating accident?
it's it
Is that
it's so that no one in the space likes to compromise their privacy, let's say that much. So
okay? Okay.
everyone just claims to not having any as a result of the
Okay.
boating
Fair
accident,
enough.
which
Okay. All right, I didn't get that. All right. I'll
given
use
my
that next time.
proximity to water, that it was just a risk that I couldn't avoid. But
All right. Fair enough.
but um,
I
oh
got a
yeah,
question.
this is it. I'll get it. So it hijacks your greed, because just by
Right.
virtue of owning it, you then become incentivized to contribute to it. And
Right.
by contributing to it, either as building technology on top of it, building a company around it, talking about it on podcasts, writing books, articles, etc., then you're actually contributing to the growth of the network, and the value of your holdings are growing as well. Because consider
Yeah.
this: if in 1998, instead of buying Netscape, which presumably, or Google or whatever, which would have been great investments, what if you could actually buy a piece of the internet itself? And so every company that gets built on the internet, the value accrues to you as a result. Isn't that a much
Sounds
safer
amazing.
and
Yeah.
bigger bet?
Safer. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow, yeah, and it's like exciting because yeah, it's gonna change the world. Like, yeah, I'm much more back on board now. Like, yeah, it's exciting. It really is. It really is. And I remember this feeling when I had in like 2016, like because I heard some of this stuff. Uh, were you disappointed that it like crashed recently? Like not crashed, but dipped recently when the whole economy went down? Because didn't some people think it like might not? It seems like it's kind of correlated with like the economy. Like, shouldn't it? Would you prefer it to be uncorrelated with the economy?
Um,
Like,
I don't
or I
care,
don't know.
and I wasn't
Okay.
I wasn't disappointed, no, because like I said before, it's so small at this point, and there's a cohort of people they're called hodlers, right? And it's a
Hodlers.
misspelling of the word hold that was in one of the old forums when this first got kicked
Okay, so
off.
it's like a all right, it's like a joke. All right.
Right. And these are the
Hodlers.
people that aren't selling no matter what.
Okay.
So they're the
Okay.
price
Doesn't
floor.
matter.
Right.
Okay.
And then now it's become a financial, it's becoming more and more mainstream. And so some institutions and some family offices and all the rest of it are starting to make some allocation to it. But it's probably amongst the riskiest, as far as they're concerned, asset in their portfolio, or holding in their portfolio. So in times that we're experiencing now of very substantial economic volatility and change, then you liquidate the most speculative assets in your portfolio.
I truly was in 2016 when I bought it in my mind a hodler, and then
Evidently not.
and then the second that I needed some cash to help my business, I
Yeah.
sold it. Like,
Yeah. So I
yeah.
think it's too young to be a safe haven asset right now, but I think for some people it is. And
But you have to believe in it, like big picture, like if you buy a company that you believe in, like yes, maybe say it's Amazon. Yeah, you buy on Amazon because you're helping a little bit, but also like you believe in it, and like that is the way that good investors work. They buy companies that they believe in and they hold them,
right.
and that is kind
So
of the same principle.
those are the hodlers. But look, in times like this where we're seeing massive liquidity issues around the world, and the global financial system is in such disarray that I'm
Is it
I
like
think it is, yes.
yeah?
I wouldn't, I'm not surprised even that it had a 40% drawdown a couple weeks ago. I mean, and if you've been in Bitcoin for long enough, this is par for the course. What you got to do with Bitcoin is zoom out, not look at it on a
Yeah,
monthly or yearly. Look
yeah.
at it on a 11-year time scale, which is how long it's been around. And you look at it on a log chart where the vertical axis is 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, etc. And the chart is from the bottom left to the top right. So there's these
Hmm.
big drops in between, and this is par for the course. And it's a very volatile asset right now. And I had no expectation that the world was going to be like, oh, Bitcoin when there's trouble, and everyone was going to pile in. So few people know what it is, how to use it, how to store it, how to buy it, all this kind of stuff. So I wasn't expecting that, but I suspect in the next 10 years, that will be a very different story. And so the infrastructure is being built day in, day out. People are asking questions about it as you are today, and some of your audience is probably getting a first look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And some, maybe a small portion will be curious enough to say, hey, what that guy was saying, like, I want to learn more about this shit. Where can I
Yeah.
find out more? And they start learning more. And this is how slowly the base is built up. And I just see that process continuing. I mean, it's gotten us to 110 billion market cap from zero, so going from 110 billion to 10 trillion isn't much of a big step in that
It's
context.
true. That's true. And there's nothing like comparable in history except for, like you were saying, back when we started trading gold and stuff. So it's like, it's exciting. Actually, like,
And
it's
and the
exciting.
internet's a great comparison,
The internet.
because early internet, we used it for ICQ and email or whatever else.
Right.
But like most people above the age of 20 and 95, they had no idea what any of it was. And I don't know how old you are, but I
I'm
remember when I was
30.
first. Right, so you probably remember a dial-up modem.
I remember
super
dial-up.
slow.
That's my
and
earliest
then,
memory.
yeah, and
Having
then
to turn off the phone to be able
if,
to use the internet.
right, and if you're trying to look at a picture, definitely not of a naked girl, but if it's like coming down slowly, right? Like if you wait 5 minutes for it to load, and you would think you couldn't imagine Netflix in the context of that because it was so slow and clunky. But the more people use it, the more the infrastructure is built out, the more network effect, the more time, the more all of that stuff. It continues to provide value. People stick with it. It provides something new of value, and it grows and develops. And I don't see any reason why that's not going to happen with Bitcoin. And I in fact, possibly sooner. All these hurdles about the government or how do I store it or this and that, they'll just be taken out one at a time.
Where do you advise people to like buy it? Like I've used Coinbase, the app Coinbase. Is that a good place to buy it?
It depends what your privacy considerations are. So,
I mean,
if you have none, then
I don't really have any.
Then if you're in the States, Coinbase, I have friends of mine just launched a great. So I think I've made all the mistakes with Bitcoin, right? By virtue of having been in it for a while, and trading it or you storing it improperly, all this kind of stuff. I think if you're getting into Bitcoin in 2020, don't try to trade it. Don't be seduced by the volatility. Like, ooh, I could make a quick buck if I buy it low and sell it high and all that kind of stuff. I would say do what's called auto DCA, auto dollar cost average. And so you say, I'm going to invest $50 a week or whatever your number is, and you just set it and forget it. And you're just slowly devoting some of your weekly savings to that. And over the course of time, the volatility gets ironed out and you're just accumulating and you're not selling. And so and this hasn't been available in the US until recently. And one of the new companies that are doing it is called Swan, SWAN Bitcoin. And so that's an app that's launching. Is today Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday.
Yeah, it's launching today. And
Okay.
And so that allows you to do just that. You set an amount and it'll just on a regular basis accumulate it for you. You don't have to worry about the crazy price swings, because I can tell you, like, it's an emotional roller coaster, as you probably know. And
if you're right, you can't look at it that way, but yeah.
Right. So I just think you buy on a regular basis, and if you're doing that and privacy is not a big deal, you can do it with, you're going to have to do KYC and stuff like that.
What if you are a privacy concerned person?
Well, then there's other places. BISC.
Can't you get it on like a hard drive or like a little flash drive or something?
Yeah, you can do that. You can find someone. You can find someone to trade with locally. There's places online. There's something called BISC, BISQ, which is a more anonymous platform for procuring Bitcoin. And then you don't have to put your identity on a platform in order to get it. And then, or if you do get it through something like Coinbase, where you have to put your name and your address and your KYC AML stuff on there, then there's something called coin joins that exists now. And so basically what that does is it doesn't like, people will know that you purchased it originally, but what it does is it de-anonymizes your actual Bitcoin, because like I said earlier, this is an open public ledger. So anyone can see that this transaction went there and this went there. Now, it's hard to, you can't know without any work who this address belongs to, right? We don't know that this address belongs to Sean, But if we do a little bit of sleuthing, then there's what's called chain analysis companies that exist now to try to find out information by analyzing transaction history. Then they could probably find out that that transaction for $5,000 to, the candy shop down the road was Sean. And so some people don't want that, and a coin join basically mixes your Bitcoin with a bunch of other ones and spits out fresh ones that are not
Okay.
impossible but
Okay.
much harder to be tracked.
Okay. I don't. I'm not a privacy guy. I don't care. Whatever. Like, I'm sitting here putting all my stuff on the internet. So whatever. Cool, man. Yeah. Like, I think you might have just switched me a little bit from to an advocate. I had like two other topics. Like, just if you want, like, we can kind of go through them quick. But
No, I'm good, man.
I'll do this one first. You said like about the interested in the psychedelics, and I listened to your podcast with Dr. Bill Richards.
Yeah,
Dude, that was awesome. Like, podcast. Was he crying at one point?
he was.
He was because he was talking to, and I'm not mocking or anything. That's amazing because the passion that he felt. He said that it was like illegal, the psychedelic thing. But you're friends with Mike Hart.
Very good friends.
So I had him I had him on the podcast too.
I know. I noticed that after you guys
yeah,
reached out.
and he is all about medical marijuana and like cannabis and psychedelics and stuff like that. But you just said it was something that you're interested in, and like, yeah, I mean, psychedelics. Like, is that when you first thought of Bitcoin when you were when you were deep into a trip, or is that just something that you just advise the people just to do once in a while to?
Well, I mean, I don't advise people to do it because it's a very serious thing. And, I know in culture, and this is shifting a lot over the last 10 years, or has shifted a lot over the last 10 years. But, I don't, a lot of people, if you mention the word magic mushrooms, are like, oh yeah, I've done it with a bunch of my buddies. We had a big giggle fest and played video games. And it was a fun time, whatever, or went to like a rave or something like that.
Yeah,
That's not at all what I'm talking about. So the people that I've interviewed, I mean, it's been a very serious intellectual pursuit for me for 10 or 15 years. And, I just believe that these substances responsibly used and used the right way can allow you to access an area or a type of consciousness that typically you're not able to access. And having that dramatically different consciousness or perspective allows you to see things differently, think about things differently, feel things differently, assess things differently. And that's incredibly meaningful and valuable to me, to be able to do that, to get out of my own way, to get out of my own head and experience, feel, and think about things differently than I typically do. And so, part of my interest has led me to find people, and I don't ascribe to like a lot of the spiritual language around this stuff. But nor do I think the scientific research is sufficient, but you got to find some happy medium there, because the experience itself, if it's the real thing, is ineffable. It's literally indescribable with words. And the scientific community, they're restrained by their tools for measuring things. So, what did the heart rate do? What was the subjective description afterwards? What was the skin temperature and all this stuff? And people like Bill, he's been at it for he's OG as it gets. He was
1963 or something like that.
Yeah, he was with the Harvard boys when all this kicked off, and he's been carrying the torch ever since. I mean, he's a legend. And he's kicked off the research in 1999 at Johns Hopkins University, and has formed the foundation for a lot of the policies that are currently being considered to change the laws around psychedelics to allow them access for people with depression, anxiety, end of life stuff. And that's incredibly encouraging. But I like to speak to those people, one, to enhance my own understanding of this subject matter, but two, to hear their stories and to help share this knowledge. Because just like Bitcoin, and I hate to bring it back, but there is a similarity here, and that is that people think it's one thing and it's actually something so very different.
I love that. That's good.
And the asymmetry of understanding of those two things not only is the opportunity for people that are opportunistically minded, but it is something, I enjoy having these conversations, and I'm happy to publish them. And so when you see such a huge knowledge gap, I'm motivated to say, guys, you're thinking about this in too narrow or a wrong
Yeah.
way.
So like
Here's some
the people that have
context.
like a giggle fest, like are they just like I've done it twice, and one time I had a really good trip and I was just with one friend. We did a little bit of reflecting, a little bit of giggling.
Yeah.
And it was a really good experience. But are the people that are giggling it like are they not just approaching it right, or are they not doing the right type of dosing, or
Look,
like
I think their intent is different. They want to have a good time with
right, their
friends, and who
intent, their
and who
intent.
am I to say that they shouldn't be doing that? All I'm saying is that these substances are capable of providing
It's kind of like
access.
day trading Bitcoin. Like that is
Great example. Great
yeah,
example.
yeah,
So
yeah.
these substances are capable of providing access to an experience that is far more meaningful than just having fun with your buddies. And, it's for that reason that I'm interested in them. And I think when this becomes legal and the policy around it changes, then the experience will be able to be um, had in a better environment, because right now, people who are interested in this stuff have to kind of construct it on their own, and they take legal risk, they take health risk, and all that kind of stuff to do it.
Get it from the street.
Right,
Yeah.
but we're moving towards a space, and I hope as soon as possible, where people can go to like a weekend spa and everything that you need is there. And in fact, and I'm not plugging them for any particular reason, but I am aware of one in the Netherlands. It's called Synthesis, and so you go there for 2-3 days, and there's doctors on sites, there's medical staff,
That's
it's
awesome.
a beautiful environment. They take you through questionnaires first. They really pad the experience with everything to give you peace of mind and to set you up for the best experience possible.
Wow.
And then they facilitate the experience. And I think that's the way to do it, because we're dealing with,
Like a retreat, like a yeah, like a
yeah,
weekend,
because
like
we're dealing with our minds here, right? And our minds
right.
is like the most precious thing. And these experiences can challenge you to the extreme, and they can be extremely frightening, and they can be extremely, like uncomfortable. And so if you don't have your shit together, or if you don't have a good support structure around the experience, it can lead to bad outcomes. And that's why you hear all these horror stories about bad trips and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
That is because, one, the intent was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and the method of executing on the experience itself was wrong. And so I think the more information that gets put out there to demystify this and to take away the hysteria and all the bullshit that's been said and the misinformation, then the sooner we'll get to a place where we can just rationally say, this is an experience that free thinking people would like to have. We should allow them to have it. What does that look like when we do?
I love it. I love it. I like the comparison that Dr. Bill Richards made to skiing. It was just like, yeah, like you don't just go right down the hill right away. You kind of have to do
Right.
a couple lessons. There's a little bit of training, and yes, sometimes people might be trained and still hit a tree, but that's very rare. Most of the time, it amplifies people's lives. I thought that was a great comparison.
And
But
another thing that he said that I think was he teared up a couple times, but I think one of them was he was describing kind of the shame that it was that he's seen so many people have this experience because he's facilitated a lot of them, and he's seen the power and the impact that they can have on people when it's done properly. And I think he was commenting on just, how unfortunate it was that people that are at the end of their life, in palliative care or whatever right now, aren't able to access this experience. I mean, you're going to die anyways. Who cares? Like,
yeah,
who cares? Like, go for it. Do what you want. And he thinks it would really help transition people to whatever comes after life. And if you think nothing comes after life, which is a perfectly reasonable assumption, then at least easing the last few, days, weeks, months, moments of your life.
it's tough to argue. Tough to argue against that, honestly. So yeah,
I think so.
cool, awesome,
Yeah.
man. All right, last thing is like your podcast, right? Like rapid, Okay, come on, I got Bitcoin rapid fire. I subscribed, and yeah, I listened to like the last episode. I've been trying to do research on you as much as possible now, but I'm subscribed. Everyone should go listen to that. But your experience podcasting, I noticed one thing you've been saying a lot, or I've heard you say a few times, is like the face to face versus like what we're doing now, virtually.
Yeah.
And I, as in my young experience podcasting, like 37 episodes in, all my interviews have been virtual. And like Joe Rogan talks about how he likes doing the face to face. Like, and it's been curious, like to ask someone who, this is pretty intimate, but like, what are the like advantages that you like of a face to face, or like, is it become so much better now that technology's better, or like, what do you like about a face to face more than a virtual? Or has that changed? Or is it maybe has it changed for you since technology's gotten
No,
better?
it hasn't changed. I mean, I do mine virtual just out of necessity because I can't
Right.
fly around and see everybody.
Right.
But I mean, look at that interview with Bill Richards, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
I noticed that.
you could
Yeah.
feel the rapport. You could
I could
feel, you know, the yeah, you could feel how we were interacting with each other, and
I
it's
really could.
that closeness, that rapport, that intimacy that you just can't get unless there's a real live human being sitting in front of you. Don't get me wrong, I'm fucking loving this conversation, love talking to you, like I love your energy. It's all good, right? But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
if we were sitting around this table right now and we had a couple of beers and this was being recorded
Yeah.
live, it would change the nature of the
It
conversation a
would.
little bit,
Yeah.
so
Cool.
I
That's
I, I,
that's
pre-
something
I
I like with your podcast. Like, how many have you had virtually? You basically will try to do it face to face anytime you can, but a lot of the times, like it's especially during the coronavirus, it's just not
well,
possible, right?
with the Bitcoin one, they've all been virtual. So I think I've done like 30 some odd at this point. And with the stuff on YouTube, I mean, literally, there was no plan or anything for that stuff. The way I came in touch with Bill was I left my job in Shanghai, wanted to, do something different for a while. I went to Amsterdam, I bought a motorhome, and my idea was just to drive around Europe for a few months. And when I encounter interesting people, just to say, hey, you want to have a conversation, and set up the tripod with my phone on it and record a conversation. So, that led me to being able to speak with people like Bill, but it also led me to record, a conversation with, like basically a guy who approached me when I was walking down the Thames River in London. He was like, experiencing mental health issues, and he was trying to raise money. I don't know if it was a scam or what for this mental health organization. And I said, do you want to go sit down on the grass for half an hour and talk about it? And he was like, yeah, okay. So we did, and so the
That's
YouTube
cool.
the YouTube stuff is not a official podcast. It's just where I put stuff that I, by happenstance record. But in the future, uh, man, I'd love it if I could have a setup like Rogan where I could fly
Yeah,
people in and just have them
yeah,
right in front of me and talk to them. So that's the dream, and I think it'll probably
yeah.
get there. But for the time being,
Yeah,
you
like
got to do it
he
this
never
way.
does virtual. And I asked Mike Hart about that, Doctor Mike Hart, about yeah, that experience with Joe Rogan. And I never knew that you get flown out and they buy your ticket and everything. That's awesome. And he must value that face to face. He really does.
100%.
He said it.
And
So
I hope Dr. Mike Hart told you that T-shirt he was wearing on Rogan's show, I fucking sent to him before before he
really,
went down.
what did it say? So like cannabis is medicine or something like
Well,
that.
that's his like
That's his.
that's his
Okay,
clinics
but the
thing.
shirt he
I
was
gave him.
wearing.
Well, we're both from Newfoundland, right? We're all proud
Yeah,
Newfies. So I gave him a one that said
Newfies.
St. John's, which is our hometown, on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Was he like? Was everyone like super pumped when he like was going on Joe Rogan?
Well,
Cause
he hasn't lived in Newfoundland for a while, like just like
okay,
me, and so not nobody knew he was, and he kept it kind of quiet.
okay,
So nobody knew he was going on. And to be honest, the weird thing about Joe is like, obviously he's got a massive following amongst a certain category of society, but like mainstream kind of still
true. That's true.
ignores him. So like
That's
back
so
home,
true.
it's not like he was on Oprah or anything,
That's so true.
but those of us who knew, like
For
me and
me, it's bigger than Oprah. Like,
yeah,
cause
of
I love Joe
course.
Rogan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So for me and a couple of the boys back home, we were like, holy shit.
yeah,
But and I thought he did an awesome job, and it was just awesome to see such a close friend be able to
yeah,
achieve something like that.
yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. Anything else? Like, you're just this. You said everyone's staying safe around you. Is Canada just like the U.S.? Everyone's quarantining because of this coronavirus thing.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
it's crazy, man. I
It
mean,
is. It really is. Like, it's
it's
crazy.
it's there's no other way to put it. It's nuts. Everything is shut down. Everyone is quarantining. Obviously the economy is tanking.
Yeah. My podcast with my car was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about it, but I just said, oh, like it'll be fine. Like we're just gonna kind of like I did not expect it to
Well,
get like this,
I was
man.
at Mike's house 2 weeks ago, and we went over to watch the UFC fights. We were hanging out, having a good time, and then like a couple days later, we were on the phone
Dude,
like,
yeah,
the world is different now. And
yeah,
so,
I can't
and
believe it.
I have friends in China still, and what I'm hopeful is that
Okay,
they're pretty much at least in Shanghai. I don't know about Wuhan, but because you can never really trust what comes out of China. But
yeah, yeah.
my friends on the street in Shanghai, they're out for picnics now. Life is back to normal.
Back to
So
normal.
So, I mean, we're going to have to deal with the economic impact of stopping the economy for several weeks, if not several months.
Right.
And that's going to be probably harder than what most people think right now. But I'm hopeful that the virus will, it's probably going to be a couple more weeks,
Yeah. There's like
optimistically.
that. I actually recently watched a documentary on the Spanish flu of 1918.
Right.
And it was crazy. Everyone was dying. It was like similar to this, but with less like knowledge. And there was just a spike, and it was a couple months, couple weeks, but it did kind of pass. So
I mean, hopefully we can avoid those levels of death rate, because I think
I can't. And I was thinking, imagine them trying to get a message out in 1918. Like now we go, like you can watch the press conference from the White House like on YouTube, or imagine that in 18, like everyone quarantined, go back to your homes. 1918, like it must have been so much harder to get that like message out. So I think that is one of the benefits we have now of quicker information. And
definitely. So I mean, it's a crazy time, man. I mean,
dude, it is. It's almost like it's not even ready to talk about it. Like we'll be able to kind of like look back on it a little bit, like once it's over.
Exactly.
But like we're right in the heart of it right now. But
hey,
it's beautiful. It's beautiful that we're able to do stuff like this. And your life, you said, is not that affected. You're able to do things online, right?
Yeah, I mean, mine isn't, but unfortunately, my family is in the restaurant business.
Ooh,
and so they have just been, hammered. So there's tough times ahead for sure. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah, just gotta be.
Keep on keeping on.
Positive, optimistic, keep on, and support local businesses if you can and stuff.
Exactly.
But hey, man, so tell everyone where they can find you, what you want them to do, follow you, listen to your podcast.
Well, I would just say, if you want to learn more about Bitcoin and hear from the people that are building out this infrastructure and this system, experts, people that write books, people that are actually building the technology, then, the podcast, Bitcoin Rapid Fire, is, a relatively popular resource for getting that kind of information. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I do tweet mostly about Bitcoin related stuff, and then some psychedelic stuff as well.
Nice.
My handle is John K Vallis, JohnKVallis. And if you have any questions specifically, you can shoot me a DM on whatever platform, and I'll do my best to respond.
Awesome. All right, I already follow you. I'll link it all up everywhere. And I gotta say, I've been looking to have like a Bitcoin person on my podcast, and like few people have been like shady, haven't been able to find the right source. But I gotta say, I got exactly what I wanted. As somebody who, I always say Bitcoin, I made $20,000 like a few years ago. Then I'm like going back and forth, but I am like now kind of going back up on it a little bit based upon what you told me, and I appreciate that. That's exactly what I was looking for. And I think anyone who is interested in Bitcoin, this is a great resource. And I think just following you going forward as things adapt and change could be a great resource.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And if you have any other doubts, you hit me up on DM too, and I'll try to assuage them. But love your energy on this stuff, man, and I appreciate the invite. So just keep up the good work, keep doing what you're doing, and I'm sure our paths will cross again in the future.
Right, when we're big and we have our studios. We'll
exactly.
All right, man. Thanks everyone for listening, and peace out.
See you guys.